This week, we remember a special Masonic educator, Ed Rund, who recently passed away. We'll read one of his classic papers on how to make Masonic education better by ensuring its equity among other Grand Lodge programs. Then, we'll take a deep dive into the human brain, explore its parts, its chemistry, and answer the question, can we rewire the brain to act Masonically? Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode number 445. What's going on in the Masonic news? Well, as many of you are undoubtedly aware, there is a great new Facebook group called Refracted Light, where you can go and pick up some great Masonic education almost on demand. There is a presentation almost every night. So it will behoove you to hop on there and check it out. Make sure you answer all of the questions in order to get into the group, otherwise they will deny you. What else is going on in Masonic news? I got the latest edition of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdictions magazine. Really cool article in there, Unearthing the Molten Sea, Relocation Leads to Rediscovery. Maybe we can read that on the program at some point. I'll have to reach out to them and make sure that's okay. I also did want to go ahead and mention we've got some great guests lined up for the program in the next few weeks. Notably, I will be having a good friend and brother of mine, Gerald Fortune, to come on the program and talk a little bit about what got him into Masonry and what he's since found and what he loves about the craft, because I think his story is just an amazing one and it's really uplifting. I'm also going to have on the program Brother Ben Williams, the man who publishes the Rocky Mountain Mason magazine, a wonderful established Masonic-based print magazine. And as a special, it's their 1-year anniversary. I am going to be having on Lou Elias. Now, Lou Elias is short for Lords. She is the worshipful master of America 57 Lodge. Now, America 57, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, women can't be Masons. And under the regular scheme of things, you would be correct. Our obligation prohibits regular Masons from sitting in lodges with Master Masons of other unrecognized bodies per se. However, America 57 stems from what's called HFAF, which is Honorable Fraternity, Ancient Freemasons, and it's Freemasonry for women. It is only for women. They do not allow men to join, just as we don't allow women to join. But, you know, it's a really interesting concept because they're doing all the same things, and the United Grand Lodge of England has said, except for the fact that they're women, they are regular in every other respect as far as they can tell. And notably, they're coming up on their 1-year anniversary as a lodge, America 57 in Washington, D.C. So we'll talk to her in the next couple weeks, and then also her husband is Akram Elias, who you may have seen Akram on many different History Channel shows, or perhaps on a special about Freemasonry here or there. He's the past Grand Master of Washington, D.C., and he's also 33rd in the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, an expert on all things Freemasonry. And after he joined Freemasonry and his wife saw a great change in him, she said, what is out there for us? And she discovered HFAF and subsequently joined. So they are both Masons, both married, and he was at her installation as worshipful master of America 57. So it's really interesting, and I hope anybody listening to this isn't like, oh, that's it, I'm never listening to Whence Came You again because blah, 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 blah. I understand there are some Masons out there who might feel that there's something to be said about this, or I shouldn't be doing this. But the fact remains is that they are regular in every other respect, and I really just want to have them on and give them the time to really talk about what America 57 means, what they've done for a number of women who have joined And so we'll be hearing from her in just a few weeks. And then also Akram Elias has agreed to come on. It's a past Grand Master of DC to come on the program. And we're going to have him on to talk about a project that he and I have been working with for a very long time, the Masonic Legacy Society. So if you would like to learn more about the Masonic Legacy Society, head on over to MasonicLegacySociety.com and download the free documents. It asks for a little bit of information from you, but rest assured that information only goes to me. You don't have to worry about it going out into the ether or being sold. It only stays with us, and that's so that we can stay in contact with you. We can check in with you if we need to and see how you're enjoying the absolutely free documents that we've put out for you. So this week is a little bit different. Over the course of my many years as a Mason now, almost 12, I have come to really respect a few of these titans of Masonic education in my own home state who have done so much to promote the craft. And when I got active in Masonic education, I first got active really with writing a lot of papers. And after writing a number of papers, I was invited to join the Allied Masonic Degrees, or the AMD. And shortly after that, I got involved at the Illinois Lodge of Research, where I was actually honored a few years ago as Educator of the Year. It was really a shock, because I really was just trying to exemplify a lot of the values that I saw in some of the men involved in the Illinois Lodge of Research and the AMD and all across the nation, as these prolific Masonic educators were out there. One such gentleman was a guy named Brother Edward Rund. And Ed Rund is an amazing guy, and he wrote, and you may know that he published quite a bit in the Illinois Lodge of Research, and we've read a few of his papers over the years. And he recently passed away. And I said, there's just nothing I can do to honor Ed more than to dedicate an episode of the podcast to him for all that he's done. And so this week, what I really want to do is, this episode is all about Ed. And a couple of his papers. We'll focus on the papers that he wrote and give you a little bit of insight into who Ed was. And, I'm sure we all know somebody like Ed. We all have an Ed Rund in our state. But Ed was my guy, and, he's just done a lot for Illinois Masonry. So I wanted to make sure that we paid him the appropriate respects. So I'll start with just this piece that I wrote for The Lamp, which was on IllinoisLodgeofResearch.org. If you don't know, I'm the webmaster there, and when we found out the morning of, we just had to put something out. So Edward Rund, a titan of Masonic education, May 6th, 2020. It was with great sadness that we received the news of our brother Edward Rund. The morning of May 6th, 2020. Ed laid his working tools down on May 5th, 2020, after a long battle with cancer. Ed was a professional educator, which our fraternity certainly benefited from over his 37 years as a Master Mason. In this time, Ed had accomplished so much. Initiated August 12th, 1982, passed to Fellowcraft on September 30th, 1982, and raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason on October 14th, 1982. He served as Master of his Lodge in Wilmette Park, number 931 in 86, 96, and 06. So just to break into that, he served as the Master of his Lodge every 10 years, except this last in 2016. And then he went on to become the Secretary for 4 years. His Masonic resume is long and accomplished. I've placed it in its entirety below for your intimate perusal. But to focus on Masonic education, we must point out that Right Worshipful Ed was a member of the Grand Lodge Committee on Masonic Education and was chairman of the committee from 1990 to 1991, 96 to 98, 2001 to 2003, and 2009 to 2011. The years he was not the chairman, he served the committee at every possible opportunity. He was also the director of Masonic education programs from 2002 to 2005. He worked with the Midwest Conference of Masonic Education every year to uplift and bring together the committees on Masonic education for the surrounding states for a number of years as well, being its secretary for 12 years. Ed was, in his heart, a Freemason and an educator, a man that lifted us up, who practiced our Masonic tenets every moment of every day. To know Ed a little better for those who never had the honor, below is one of his Masonic papers, which was published by the Illinois Lodge of Research, which I'm sure you will find both inspirational and educational. To Brother Ed's family, his friends, and closest brothers, our deepest sympathies. A note from our chairman of Masonic Education in Illinois, Scott Duvall, said, quote, "I believe that Brother Ed was such a wonderful, kind-hearted Mason who supported your efforts because you were his brother. I think he believed that's what brothers do. Illinois Masonry is better for Ed, having been an active member for many years, and I will truly miss his friendship." Now, the paper that I posted for Ed that I wanted everybody to read was "We Are Failing Our Masonic Educators," which was actually the last piece that he wrote for the Illinois Lodge of Research, published quite a number of years ago. But just before he wrote that one, he was also published in another article that we'll read for you this week. But one of the most incredible quotes that he wrote in this piece is in the last paragraph, and I'll just read that to you in full. He says, "In the ignorance, apathy, and distractions at each level, we have lost our perspective on the critical importance of educating our Masons and in supporting their self-directed learning efforts. We need to make Masonic education job one." Now, Brother Ed's Masonic resume is literally 4 pages long. I can give you just a couple quick highlights because really I would just love for you to head on over to IllinoisLodgeofResearch.org, click on the LAMP, which is our blog there, and read the latest blog entry, which is this. But of course, outside of Blue Lodge, he was part of Masonic Foundations. Of course, he worked for the Grand Lodge, the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite Valley of Chicago, the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite College of Freemasonry, York Rite, the Sovereign College, Red Cross Constantine. He was elected in 2008, and he actually resigned from the Red Cross in 2015. Glenview chapter of the OES. He was, of course, part of the Illinois Lodge of Research, serving as its master in 2000 and 2001. He won the Sirza Award in 2000, the Toric Award in 2002, chairman of the awards committee. I mean, the guy has just been everywhere. So, but we all know somebody like this, not to detract from Ed's accomplishments, but we know so many guys like this, and there really are treasures. So I hope that if you know Ed, you appreciate this. And if you didn't know Ed, it makes you think about somebody in your own Masonic sphere that is like this. As we've said and we've continued to do, we are not putting any advertisements in these episodes until the COVID-19 pandemic has flattened everywhere and we can get back to some sense of normalcy. And with that in mind, just remember, if you want to help this show out, head on over to wcypodcast.com and click on Support the Show to see how you can help us out. Let's get into the education this week, which of course, as I mentioned, is by Brother Ed Rund. Now, this is the first paper he ever published with the Illinois Lodge of Research that I can find in the transactions of the Lodge of Research, and he joined in 1990, and the Lodge of Research, that is, and he went on to publish this first piece in 1996. Some thoughts on the basics of Masonic education by Edward Rund, past director of Masonic Education, Grand Lodge, Illinois. Now, we have read this piece or one that is a newer version of this on the program before. But this piece, again, should give you a great idea of how Ed viewed Masonic education. Over the course of my Masonic years, I have acquired growing realization that if a high moral standard of thought and behavior is the earthly goal, then Masonic education must be the primary means of attaining it. And although people learn by both intentional activities and incidental occurrences, the certainty or at least the strong probability of making good progress on our spiritual temples, must come from the planned, consciously reflective, hopefully guided pursuit of moral knowledge. The many experiences that the active Mason encounters in observing and participating in degree work, as well as through the behavioral modeling that occurs during fraternal relations, provide only a partial or incomplete means of obtaining those truths that we seek. Certainly learning occurs as a result of these encounters, and we do become better men, yet much is left to chance, especially considering the growing pattern of irregular attendance seen in our lodges across the nation. I do believe that while the memorization of catechisms and ritual does create new neural connections which can change the ways of thinking and acting similar to those found in more formal learning environments, such memorization is not a fully adequate substitute for the latter. It must be remembered that while Freemasonry offers an integrated system of philosophy, paths, and pursuits of truth, it is a system veiled in allegory, not to mention one which has been transmitted to us in the 18th century language and conceptions. Without a process of interpretation, clarification, conscious awareness, I am learning, active reflection, this is how that information fits with what I already know, and the persistent intention to apply the new understandings, example, practice new behaviors until they become habit, we are deluding ourselves about the likelihood of Masonry helping brothers bring the building of their moral character to fruition. Given this foundation, how can we best ensure that a jurisdiction's Masonic education program will achieve the above standard imperatives? I believe it is necessary to first have three critical conditions present. 1. A genuine commitment to Masonic education and its financial support from the Grand Master and his officers. Let's break into this paper real quick for a second. Many of us have great Masonic education programs, but let me ask, in comparison to other Grand Lodge programs, how much is Grand Lodge supporting Masonic education? If membership gets $20,000, how much does the education committee get? Vice versa. Think about these things. Let's continue. Number 2, a realistic workable system, methods and resources for the planning and implementation of the various elements of the program. And 3, an ongoing commitment to the educational activities by all parties concerned so that the continuity over time is established. Given the presence of these conditions, there are 3 essential components to providing the membership with consistent, high-quality Masonic education. Design. It is necessary for the State Education Committee to establish 1 or more teams to either carry out the design and development of educational programs and supporting materials, examples would be video, audio, and print media, or to select existing programs and materials from other jurisdictions. This process must be supported by both proper policy and financing if a serious and effective educational campaign is to be maintained. Delivery. As with any educational process, instructors or mentors must be properly trained, monitored, and evaluated. The best program design possible will go for naught when developed by unqualified, although motivated instructors. Men teaching at the district and lodge levels need to be properly selected and trained for presenting materials to an adult population that has grown up with the sophistication of television, the computer, and multimedia presentations. Current adult learning experiences tell us, for example, that these participants are unlikely to be attentive for more than 15 to 30 minutes to material presented by straight lecture methods. Administration. An organization structure needs to be established that will support the delivery of educational programming. The focal person being the Lodge Education Officer, the LEO. Support is essential from both the lodge and district levels. Properly trained, the district deputy can provide the administrative support from his level, although a trained district education officer can generate the leadership spark necessary to bring the program to life. If that position is not established, it becomes critical to create an area education officer who can bridge the gap between the Grand Lodge Education Committee and local lodge levels. Without these points of administrative support, the delivery of education in the lodge is left to chance. The chance that the LEO will have the ability, motivation, and resources to overcome that natural lethargy indifference, and lack of support that seems so prevalent today in many of the fellows of our craft. Finally, consideration should be given to the degree of intensity of Masonic education which is appropriate to the audience, time, and circumstances. What is their current level of Masonic knowledge? Are they newly made, entry-level, or seasoned advanced-level Masons? What is the depth of their interests or commitment to education? What length of time is available for delivery? These considerations suggest a threefold approach to Masonic education. 1. Brief time, minimal intensity, after meals, short talks, after dinner presentations. 2. Medium time and intensity, lodge district education programs up to 1-2 hours in length. And 3. Longer time, greater intensity, formal education courses, especially beneficial for officers and newly made Masons, delivered through group participation or individual correspondence. Given the conditions, components, and considerations described above, a grand jurisdiction will have traveled a long way toward ensuring that its membership will be not only Masons in their hearts but also in their behavior and with the knowledge to both exemplify it and enthuse others. So there you have, in 1996, Ed Rund basically laying out what needs to be done, and he's being kind of polite. But as the years move on, he pushes a little bit more. And I think really by the time he writes the piece that I posted inside of the announcement on the lamp, he really is at a point where he's fed up and he's telling us exactly what needs to be done. Now, in that particular piece, he goes to say that there's more to Masonry than the memorization, and that's fine, right? But the next year, in 2007, he writes another piece, and it's called In Defense of Memorizing Masonic Ritual. Let's go ahead and check that one out right now. In Defense of Memorizing Masonic Ritual by Edward A. Rund, Illinois. 1. Introduction. Reflection upon my career both in industry and at the university, a prominent theme becomes evident. No matter the sphere of employment nor the job category, my energies have been directed toward helping others achieve their potential. Whether trainer, educator, or rehabilitation counselor, I seem to have always been drawn to helping others learn and grow. And such has been the case in my 25 years in Masonry. Yes, I learned the ritual to perform my various lodge roles as officer and in the degrees, but never to the point of struggling to become Grand Master or Grand Lecturer, respectively. No, once again I was drawn to Masonic education initially at the Grand Lodge and district levels, but primarily across my Grand Lodge jurisdiction and beyond. And because of my training experience with adults, my work as a professor in the academy, and especially my doctoral studies in adult continuing education, I seem to have always maintained an educational orientation for developing Masons. Now this stands in contrast to our 300-year history in Freemasonry, where the emphasis has been on mouth-to-ear memorization of ritual. Through all these years, I downplayed both consciously and unconsciously the importance of memorization for improving a man's attitude and behavior. To me, it seems that the key was to educate the man in Masonry's rich history, philosophy, and symbols, and to engage in self-directed learning by emphasizing available reading and study materials. By taking a time-tested cognitive approach, I saw the man rationally learning to control his impulses and make correct moral choices by acknowledging how a good Mason behaves. Over the past few years, following my own inclinations and interest, I have spent a fair amount of time reviewing the latest scientific findings regarding brain structure and functioning, as well as the reasonable new field of cultural biology. And more specifically, how the brain structure shapes our moral choices and guides our behavior. I learned that changing neural structures in the brain leads to changes in attitude and behavior. I learned that learning as well as memorizing reshapes those neural structures. I began to build the premise that, in addition to educating our Masons, we could bypass some of the choice probabilities that come with applying cognitive learning by using memorization to directly change the brain structure and subsequently improve behavior. So, in what ways do current research data support this premise? It is possible that the ancient Greeks had an important answer in their emphasis on memory. One of the 5 canons of rhetoric? The model of research premise is that memorization of Masonic ritual leads to reconfiguration of neural networks, which leads to changes in attitude and behavior. Part 2. Issues involved with the research premise. The following are just a few of the issues that arise when we consider the 3 elements of the research premise and the need to locate findings related to the links between those elements. 1. Just how serious are Masonic leaders about genuinely making good men better? What do we really mean by that aphorism to which we so frequently pay lip service? Is it a mission statement for use against our critics, or a palliative for our consciousness? How do we measure the results of our efforts for individual Masons? Or should we even try? Is that too much formalization? What is the memorization, and is it an effective way to improve a person's thoughts and actions? How does it differ from the cognitive inputs from Masonic education and self-directed study? And last, can we escape the age-old trap of mind-body dualism and envision the mind, an integral part of the body, and self-consciousness as arising from brain activity? Part 3. Process and importance of memorization. At the outset, I wish to give a great deal of credit to the work of Dr. Lawrence Tancredi, from which a fair portion of this paper is based. Brain functioning related to memory suggests a limited short-term capacity and a larger capacity for long-term, more durable memory. The short-term memory is called primary, and the more permanent is secondary. As environmental stimuli hit our 5, possibly 6 with psychic senses, using the conscious portion of our brains, we choose to attend to only a small portion of these. Seeing, hearing, or feeling something that we attend to enters short-term memory. For information we wish to retain more permanently, we have available a number of techniques. The movement into long-term memory is aided by using multiple senses, paying close attention, contemplating the information, associating the new with what we already know, jotting it down, such as with a phone number, and most effectively through recitation. Recitation can occur in a number of ways: thinking about it, writing it, and saying it out loud. The latter is the most effective since it involves more senses than any other type of review. As we will see shortly, this engraves the mental trace more and more deeply. We use the term memorizing to define this process of learning, or moving data into secondary memory. Scientists have found the minimum time for reciting to do its job is a few minutes. A typical model of the process would be attention, encoding, storage, retrieval. Once one has attended to something, it must be encoded if it is to be remembered. There are 3 ways to do this: how it sounds, acoustic; how it looks, visual; and what it means, semantic. The way you encode the information may affect how you remember it later. If you used just the first 2, you will remember the information, but possibly not the meaning. The more ways you encode it for storage in secondary memory, the more complete the retrieval. As we saw, recitation is the best storage process, and it is helped through elaboration and association with other but similar information. Retrieval is simply the process of remembering something. When attempting to retrieve it, helps to think about ideas which are related. Over time, memories can decay. Examples would be, words of a lecture can't be recalled and require added practice and relearning. The more this is done, a technique called overlearning, the more the memory path is being reinforced. Research shows learning that uses memorization information begins slowly, then speeds up, and then levels off. Plateaus occur, and fatigue sets in, calling for a rest. This experience is labeled neurotransmitter depletion, and is the reduction in available chemicals for brain cells to transmit impulses. Breaks of 10 minutes and stopping after 4 hours seem to be most effective. From his studies, educator Michael K. Barron states, quote, "The memorization and recitation of the classic utterances of poets and statesmen form part of a tradition that stretches back to antiquity, when the Greeks discovered that words and sounds, and the rhythmic patterns by which they were bound together in poetry and rhetoric, awakened the mind and shaped the character." End quote. This process of memorization used for cultural learning and forming one's character continued in American schools from the beginning and until the progressive educational movement during the 1970s. And what a loss it has been for us all. Part 4. Brain Structure and Biology. Having now found that memorization is effective in moving information to long-term memory, we need to review recent scientific findings to explore how this process works in the brain, and especially how it directs thoughts and actions. First, let's review the basics of brain structure. The brain has an average weight of 3 pounds and is composed of 3 parts, the largest being the cerebrum. Below that, the cerebellum, and below that, the brainstem, linking to the spine. The brain is bilateral, for the most part, and is divided into 4 lobes: frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal. The mass is made up of varying concentrations of neurons, of many shapes and sizes. It is estimated that there are over 1 trillion neurons in our brain. The axon of one neuron lies close to the cell body dendrites of another neuron, separated by the synapse. Signals are passed between neurons and means of an electrical impulse, or by using a neurotransmitter chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, with the synapse. It is the phenomenal network of neurons and their transmission of impulses that govern our existence, thoughts, and behaviors. The early Greeks were uncertain as to whether the human mind was located within the brain or the heart, and unfortunately, they drew a clear distinction between the mind and body. Interestingly, as early as 400 BCE, Hippocrates identified the brain as the seat of the emotions and behavior. Today, we know many things about the structure and functioning of the brain, which gives rise to the mind of awareness of self and surroundings, is extremely complex and constantly changing, and the separation brain from body is really non-existent. The last quarter of the 20th century saw the battle between the conventional view of mind separate from the brain called mentalism, and the latest view labeled physicalism. The former focused on the dynamics of mental process and explored concepts such as free will, learning, character, and the importance of nurture in child development. Physicalism stresses the primacy of the brain, structure and chemistry, genetics, and the importance of nature in child development. Thus, recent research supports the beliefs of early observers about the impact of memorization behavior, where they saw memorization into the black box equals behavior. Today we see within the black box genes directing the production of enzymes which metabolize neurotransmitters and support the creation of neural networks which then shape thought and choices of action. Neuroscience research seems to be pushing the pendulum more toward nature, genetics, and biology than nurture, although I believe both must continue to play important roles in our development. Yet admittedly, there is growing importance of our environment influencing even basic biological structures in the brain. In a landmark experiment, Benjamin Libet used electroencephalography to measure the association between cerebral activity, conscious awareness of the intention to act, and the time when a voluntary act is actually conducted. He recorded waves of the brain activity approximately a half second before the subject was consciously aware of the intention to say, move his hand. Hence, the suggestion is strong that the brain initiates the process toward a movement before the mind or consciousness is even cognizant of the decision. This and other research by Platt and Gilnker indicate that there are 2 classes of input that motivate us to action: current sensory data and stored representations of events. There is research evidence that stored representations such as memorizing Masonic ritual can function to initially direct a person's thoughts and actions without conscious awareness of this until the act occurs. Unfortunately for society, studies have also found genetic abnormalities in brain biology that also shape behavior. 5. Making moral choices and beyond. Dr. Lawrence Tancredi states in his excellent book, Hardwired Behavior: What Neuroscience Reveals About Morality, quote, "Because the brain is basic to decision-making, it must play a powerful role in our thinking regarding moral issues and consequently in the way we treat each other in our society to maintain order and uphold fairness, individual rights, and equality," end quote. He has found research evidence that virtually every moral issue draws on almost every part of the brain, especially due to the role of emotions underlying moral choices. For our purposes, we can look at two functioning regions of the brain, emotional and executive. The former relates to the limbic system, the oldest portion of our brains, containing the amygdala, hippocampus, anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, and the hypothalamus. By way of the sensory cortex and the frontal lobes, the amygdala applies emotional meaning to environmental stimuli and then directs the mind to act in a specific way. It is also the structure for stored emotions. The ACC is the brain's mediator and functions in emotional self-control and conflict resolution. The hippocampus is involved in transforming new memories into long-term memory and complements the amygdala. The hypothalamus is the quote-unquote master regulator, serving to control throughout the autonomic nervous system, like the heart rate, blood pressure, hunger, thirst, and hormone secretion. All of these components are interconnected with other portions of the brain, thus emotions are integrally a part of all thoughts and actions, and emotions, pleasure, fear, anger, disgust, are more primitive than the cognitive skills such as planning, analyzing, and problem solving, which are carried out in the frontal lobes, particularly the prefrontal cortex of the brain. This is the executive brain, the seat of understanding. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's command post and is believed to be the location of our concept of self, our attitudes and beliefs. This area is crucial for handling body movements and complex behaviors necessary to achieve specific goals. It is clearly connected with the other lobes in the brain mentioned above, permitting the integration of information from many sources. Quote, "This includes imagining the mental features of a task, to associative learning, decision-making, and guidance, and finally to the control of reward-based behavior," end quote. In addition to the brain segments and associated neurons already mentioned, there is a mirror neuron mechanism which is essential to understanding and imitation. It permits the capacity to learn by imitation. This certainly supports the importance of a new Masons spending time in the presence of more experienced or polished Masons in order to learn to be a Mason in their heart. As Tancredi states, the mirror neurons learn from observation of patterns of others how to behave morally in social situations. Finally, we need to highlight the concept of neuroplasticity. This is the ability given input by memorization and other forms of learning of neurons at the synapses to create new connections, thereby forming new networks and thus rewiring the brain. This is supported by the Nobel Prize-winning research of David Hubble and Thorsten Wiesel. Neuroplasticity is the basis of restoring physical abilities following a stroke or injury. Research has found psychotherapy just as effective as medication for inducing changes in the brain blood flow, in the frontal cortex, ACC, and hippocampus. I would suggest this is also the basis for results found when using the power of positive thinking. Part 6. Conclusions and Recommendations. Returning to the initial premise, we have now located research that suggests the act of memorizing provides the ingrained input for shifting information from primary to secondary memory. The neuroplasticity process reshapes neural linkages, forming new networks between the executive and emotional brain sectors. The new networks are the source of future thoughts and behaviors, the intention of which seems to occur milliseconds before becoming consciously aware of that intention. Intention is the precursor of the choices we make to think and act in specific ways. Dr. Tancredi and others have demonstrated that by providing early and subsequently appropriate input, those networks can become the foundation of moral choices. Freemasonry is a course of moral instruction. Our ritual, obviously, is replete with directives and examples of moral behavior. Yes, we can learn the proper ways to think and behave as good Masons through self-study, such as the Illinois Intender Program, association with other Masons, and participation in degree work. But this research shows that only memorization of catechism and ritual directly rewire the brain for making good men better. In a word, we may be bypassing some of the elements of choice and going directly to ensuring moral thoughts and actions. While jurisdictions around the United States have tried to make Freemasonry more attractive by reducing or eliminating the catechism requirements and providing all-in-one-day degrees without either memorization or opportunities and materials for self-study or study groups, there is very little chance of the newly raised Mason becoming other than a dues card carrier. Based on my research, I strongly recommend we re-emphasize memorization of the catechism for all 3 degrees, and as well as some of the degree ritual and lectures. We will truly then be making good men better. And if you're interested in that paper, I would urge you to hop on over to IllinoisLodgeResearch.org and see how to access all the papers. I don't know what else to tell you guys about Ed Rund other than he was a diamond in the rough. You know, we have a lot of people out there that write about incredible things in Freemasonry, but Ed was different. He thought about things scientifically, spiritually, and he never had anything bad to say about some of the more interesting concepts like spiritualism, mentalism, even psychic ability, and the power of positive thinking. It's very interesting stuff, and I do believe in a lot of it. And I think Ed did too, and I think his paper has a lot of merit when we think about repetitive learning, and we are rewiring the brain. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode featuring Ed Rund's papers and a little bit of a celebration of his life. And I would now ask you all to just join me in a moment of silence for Ed, but not just Ed. I'd like to dedicate the moment of silence to anybody who we've lost, whether you know somebody or you know of somebody. Let's take a full minute of silence for those brothers and our friends and family who we may have lost. All right. Thank you once again for joining me this week. If you want to find out how to support this show, head on over to wcypodcast.com, click on support the show, and check out the options there. The last thing I need to do this week is to make sure I thank all of our contributors, our producers, and our fellows who month after month donate to keep this program going during this time and in the years past. We can't do it without you. You guys are amazing, and thank you, thank you, thank you. That's it. Until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.